Hello everybody, I am CyberHex, and welcome to Your Arrival's Handbook. This is part 2 of my stage guide for the game. So in the first episode, I went really in depth on all of the starter stages. Highly recommend watching that if you haven't already, because that's really gonna inform the way I talk about some of these Counterpick stages here, which is what we'll be doing in part 2. We'll be going over every single Counterpick stage, all 10 of them. So, yeah, Fire Capital's not like my least favorite stage in the game, but it's definitely one of the most infamous of them. As you can probably tell, this stage is really big. And that's kind of what this stage's identity is, honestly. It's got the biggest blast zones, it's the longest stage, it's got really far apart platforms. You know, can't even go from top platform to top platform. Like, it's so... you can do that. So yeah, when it comes to the stage, you largely see it being picked by heavy. You know, being able to live to 200 is, really neat. It's really neat, is what it is. Now, realistically speaking, you often see it get banned against heavies, because who wants to be killing at 200? Not me, that's for sure. But yeah, in theory, like, if you leave the stage open against a heavy, they certainly won't pick it every time, but especially if there's someone who likes to play more defensive, because that is what the stage promotes, then yeah, they're gonna pick it and you're gonna be miserable. And not only do you just kind of live forever on the stage, no matter how you're trying to kill, but it's also really hard to get in on people that are playing really defensive. With you being able to kind of hang out under these platforms, even if you don't have necessarily the easiest way to sneak out, you know, you can still kind of play hard to get just between this little area here, with these platforms being fairly easy to travel between. And with the opponent having to cover so much ground to even get in on you, any approach they try to go for is really predictable. So a lot of the time what you'll see is someone gets a lead, and they just kind of hunker down in this corner, or like up here on this platform. Either one really works. And then you just gotta figure out how to, you know, get out of that disadvantageous position. And, you know, against a heavy, that's especially going to be bad, because they'll be playing in a way where you might not be able to easily find a kill confirm on them, and a raw kill just won't kill early enough. So this ends up being probably, like, the slowest stage to play on in the whole game. You know, just huge length, huge blast zones, all of it just keeps the game going for as long as you can. And for some people, that war of attrition is definitely going to be playing to their strong suits. Definitely has its place in the game, but you gotta be careful about, you know, who you leave it open against for sure. This is probably one of the more heavily banned stages, if I had to guess. And because of how easy it is to maneuver around these two, you can potentially see ladder combos, but because it's such like a small percentage of the stage, they honestly don't happen that often, right? Even this kind of combos. Now, like, if your stage carry is really good, you know, you can rack up a lot of damage before putting someone off stage, but even then, it's like, because the stage is so big, the situations where you'll actually be able to put someone off stage are just gonna happen less often. So I'd say, you know, crazy big punishes on this stage are fairly rare just compared to other stages. Now that being said, once you do get someone off stage, while you do have this platform to recover to, it's a little hard to reach. You'll definitely be seeing platforms used for recovery less on the stage. We're going to be seeing this with a few of the Counterpick stages, that there are platforms close to the edge, but they're really tall. So their use in recovery ends up being super niche, limited to, you know, other characters that can reliably recover super high, like Daedalus or Eliana, for example, where they can just, boop, they go high. You know, I can't reach her from that height. I can probably... So if I get, like, a wall jump, you know, here, I barely reach it. So as you can see, yeah, it's possible to use this, but it's not going to happen very often, and this one's just a little too far in to really see much use. So in general, getting out of this advantage isn't always the worst on this stage. You do have, you know, you do occasionally have platforms to escape to, or potentially areas to escape to where they won't be able to extend off of platforms. But the offstage, you know, as rare as you go offstage, it is pretty bad once you get stuck there. I don't really think there's too much else to cover with the stage. Again, ends up being really slow. Do your best to hold the lead here. Again, heavies in general really like the stage. So Crag, Daedalus, Sov especially. You see them pick it a lot. Outside of heavies, I think the only character that I'd really give a special mention to is Meeple. She's so fast and has such good ability to kind of camp behind Lily that you definitely see Meeple players pick this stage more often than other lightweight characters. Alright, so next up, what we got here is going to be Air Armada. I also like to call it Air Amanda. I think it's a little, you know, it's funny. Yeah, so this is a very bizarre stage. I think the first thing people are gonna think of only stage in the game where the wall doesn't go all the way down. So because of that, recovery on this stage has to be on point. You got very little margin for error, you know, compared to other stages. As you can see, I did pick Eliana for this one. This is probably the only stage where I'm going to do this, but I think the stage is pretty good for Claren, but like really good for Ellie. This is probably my favorite stage for her specifically. Yeah, a big thing with this stage is that it's kind of the first one we're seeing where the blast zones are like crazy small. We definitely saw a bit of that with Fire Explorer, sorry. But with Armada, it's like the bottom blast zone's a little big, but then there's the whole pineappling thing. But the side and top blast zones are some of the smallest in the game. So stocks really go flying here, and you can absolutely feel that effect. This is probably one of the riskiest stages to pick in general. I personally think, you know, that risk is actually worth it a good amount of the time. There are a lot of characters like Eliana, Crag, Ori, Edelus, Forceburn that are all super solid here, and that's really just the short list. There's plenty of others I could mention. Because, yeah, as you can see, you know, you make one tiny mistake, and it's like, you just do something like that. You have very little room to DI. The stage overall is an average length, too, so, like, it feels pretty large because of these platforms, which we'll get into in just a minute. But I still feel like it's easy enough to get someone off stage, and then once you do, even though you have, like, decent enough landing options, because you have such little room to DI off stage, it can be really hard to not just get, like, you know, fair chained or bear chained or whatever, depending on what character you're fighting. So, you know, dying early is just the name of the game here. Now that being said, the platforms on the stage definitely pretty interesting. Pretty high, right? The stage only has these high platforms. So obviously, most characters not going to be able to shark. Now there are some that can, you know, Eliana, Edelus, stop teching in. Alright, like I can up tilt on that platform, I can just go grab you. Sylvanos can up shove on that platform. I don't know too many other examples like that off the top of my head. But you definitely see some stuff like that, right? A few characters can hit them from the ground, but for the most part, you gotta go up. And with the platforms also being pretty wide, it can be hard for a lot of characters to cover everything. You know, you gotta have, like, giant aerial or some kind of, like, big downstrong where you can do, like, waveland downstrong. You can't do it with Eliana, but just pretend that I'm, like, Forceburn, right? You gotta be able to go up and do it like a spacing where, you know, smaller characters, you might not be able to cover everything. Bigger characters, I think you can if you're, like, dead center, but that's only, like, the biggest characters in the game, like, you know, Sylvanos and Edelus and whatnot. Now, these platforms are pretty tricky to use for neutral in a lot of ways, so you kind of have to use them defensively, sort of like, Fire Capital, right? Now, while the blastings are small, so stocks go flying, these platforms are really hard to, like, get on and off of a lot of the time, especially to get on for a lot of characters. So yeah, pretty hard. Like, you can use them defensively, but the thing is when you're trying to plat drop with them, and Ellie's kind of a weird example because she is, like, floaty. But obviously you have quite a ways to fall, so you can definitely mix people up, you know, do sort of like what you do on Merchant, but with way less freedom, because most characters can't easily get between these two platforms. Like, you can, but, you know, much more telegraphed. But because of that, you know, standing up here, especially against characters that struggle with thought camping, like Claren and Edelus, can potentially be a bit of a pain point for them. You just have to make sure to get, like, a comfortable enough lead first, to not just have that get thrown away in one, like, bad interaction. These platforms can also play a role in recovery, so they're not the easiest to reach, but, you know, again, like I mentioned for Fire Capital, right? If you can go high enough, they're going to be super useful. So a character like Eliana is going to make great use of them. And with them being very close to the edge, you know, it's not that hard to reach them as long as you have the height. You just gotta make sure you have it. If you're recovering super high, there's also the possibility of just going straight to the platform, which is pretty decent. But you gotta keep in mind that if you get hit on these platforms, there's a very good chance you just die, right? Zetter can kill Raster at like 30 or 40 on these if Raster's on fire. Like, you die just obscenely early on these platforms. So getting caught on them is kind of a death sentence, and that does make going to the platform for recovery always a bit riskier, because if the opponent reads that and catches you, done. There's not much you can do. And while it is pretty hard to combo on these platforms, every once in a while you will see it happen, and that just kind of adds to, like, the chaotic nature of the stage, where stocks just go fly in every direction. I think I pretty much, you know, went through the list of characters who picked the stage earlier. You know, you see a lot of, like, Forceburn, Ori, Crag, Edelus, Eliana, but even not to mention the characters like, say, Zetterburn, right? Zetterburn's still really strong here. Sylvanos is pretty strong here as long as you're comfortable recovering. Like, there's a lot of characters at, like, this stage. With Edelus and Sylvan in particular, because these platforms, you know, only really aid in neutral defensively and not offensively too, it also means you gotta be comfortable with your ground and neutral. It's definitely a weird hybrid, right? Where you're either probably plat camping or playing super grounded. And being able to deal with both is going to be a key part of mastering this stage. Alright, guess you forgot to press record. Woohoo! So, it's finally says the stage I like, right? So this is Rockwall. I call this like the Russian roulette stage. Along with Armada, I feel like they're both just Russian roulette because picking the stage is always a huge risk. Like Armada, the blast zones are really small, pretty much across the board. Bottom blast zone's not super small. You do have a wall that goes all the way down, but because the side blast zone being, I think, even smaller than Armada, like from the edge, you have such little room to DI that a lot of the time that bottom blast zone becomes more fatal just because your room to DI is so much smaller than it normally is. And in general, that does end up being a big theme at this stage, right? Is that, like, you really can't mess up your DI, and then it's very easy to get in fun situations where no matter how you DI, you are just dead. So if you're picking the stage, you definitely are doing, like, a show of confidence. Like, yeah, I can definitely kill you on this stage before you kill me. Now, keep in mind, this is the second longest stage in the game. So there is still potential for a lot of, like, defensive, slower play. You have a lot of stage to work with. Now, unlike Fire Capital, if you corner yourself and you get put off stage, you know, I mean, it is hard to get back on stage with Fire Capital because of, like, the platforms, but at least you have a lot of room to DI. On Rockwall, if you get hit, it's like, you might literally just be dead off of that first combo starter, and you're put in a situation where the opponent has to mess up for you to live. That happens on the stage more than probably any other stage. That being said, you know, you obviously want to make sure that your combos, and especially your edge guards, are on point and that you're making the most reward out of it. Now, unlike Armada, you do actually have low platforms to work with, so I feel like the platform structure of the stage does make it a kind of more accessible cheeser stage compared to Armada. Right, I mean, using those platforms, you know, I wouldn't say it's, like, crazy limited, but you definitely have to, like, form your playstyle to it a lot more than I'd argue you do on Rockwall. Now keep in mind, you know, the platforms here are stacked, which is weird, right? This is the only stage in the game where there's, like, stacked platforms like this, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to get used to. It does open up for some ladder combos, so I feel like it's kind of weird, because if the stage's blast zones weren't so small, it would kind of limit, like, where you can DI when you're stuck here. But sometimes if you, like, DI out, and you have to DI further to the wall to get out, then suddenly you're put into, like, a just as bad situation, which I guess is kind of the case for a lot of stages, but on Rockwall it just feels so much worse. Because if the opponent does catch on to where you're DIing to, then you might just be dead off of the next hit. Now because of the stacked nature of these platforms, it is actually pretty hard for top plat to interact with, like, the ground level, whereas the ground level, you know, obviously it takes a long time on some level to, like, get up there and shark, but it is totally possible. You definitely do see some platform camping on this stage, like with Armada. Of course, having these low platforms, you know, if you have, like, good airspeed or a good plat boost, you will be able to maneuver between these two platforms quite nicely. Which does give you an extra way to sort of get in on an opponent that's just hanging out in the corner, but you don't want to be too predictable with it. Yeah, you know, despite the stage being fairly long, whenever their corner carry is successful, again, it just leads to the scariest edge cards in the game, and it's hard not to understate that when it comes to Rockwall. When it comes to characters to pick the stage, I feel like you see a pretty similar group to Armada, but honestly, like, slightly more expansive. So, like, you know, Crag, Ori, like, is probably some of the strongest characters on the stage. Forceburnt's really good here. I really like Rano's really good on the stage, personally. You definitely see a lot of heavies trying to make use of it, like, really ramp up their kill power to the extreme. Really, I don't think there's any characters that are bad here. I'd say that Absa and Clarin can be a little underwhelming, especially Absa. I know there are some Absa players that really dislike it. So maybe be a little careful about particularly picking it if you play Absa. I think it's pretty hard for her Cloud to, like, control the platforms on the stage like she can on most stages. So it ends up being a little weaker for her, but realistically, there's always some way to, like, just BS someone here, and that alone does make it something worth keeping in your back pocket, in my opinion. So, next up on the chopping block, we have Treetop Lodge, and finally, we are getting away from those stupid, annoying big stages, and we got a teeny tiny one. This is tied for the shortest stage length in the whole game. Now, interestingly enough, while the side blast zones, you know, is ranked as the smallest trim center, now, I ranked everything from the center because I believe that would be the most fair, but it is important to have a little bit of nuance here because, of course, with the stage being so short, you can see there is a lot of room to just kind of go fuck off stage, right? So if you get put off stage, basically there's a really interesting dynamic with the stage, where because it's so short, you get thrown off stage really easily. But because there's so much room to DI, it is fairly hard to kill off of an edge guard on the stage, definitely not impossible. Obviously, you also have like the non-symmetric, the asymmetrical platforms to talk about in a little bit. I think especially if you get knocked off the left side of the stage and having this platform here is super helpful. Unsurprisingly, I think you can probably guess by this point, this one can be used for recovery, but guess what? It's not as helpful. So yeah, being thrown off stage, it happens a lot here. And obviously you never want to be off stage, unless you're like edge guarding, I guess. All things considered, being thrown off stage here isn't the worst thing in the world. Now, interestingly, the stage also does have like closest bottom blast zone. So you do get kills off the bottom weirdly fast on the stage, and for some characters like Claire, that actually is really useful. Her dare, there's a lot of ways to like hit her dare. So for some characters, it's going to be really important. Some it'll be nice for, some cheesy stuff. And then for others like Palm, it will mean nothing. So definitely something to think about. If someone's like falling for a lot of setups into like your dare or whatever, and you have like a spike you can kill them with, then definitely worth going here. Now, while the smallness of the stage does mean that you get thrown off stage pretty easily, what it also means is that even if your opponent's playing defensive, they're never that far away from you, all things considered. It's not super hard to close the gap against opponents on the stage, which honestly is probably the main thing I like about the stage. And for a while, like the main thing I would think about when I picked it. It's not the only stage with the super short length, but out of all of them, it's the only one where there's no overhanging platform. So in a lot of ways, it really is the smallest stage in the game. And yeah, that makes it really easy to play like a super scrappy playstyle here a lot of the time. Even though you have this platform up here, which can be a little hard to deal with, having this one over here, even though it's shorter, still gives you some potential ways to contest. And even then, again, with the stage being so short, it's like, you can kind of threaten this area, and if the opponent backs off, then they essentially have to throw themselves off stage. And from there, you might not really get an edge guard, but you do force them to kind of panic a little and reposition themselves. So it's hard to really camp people on the stage, and it really does, in a lot of ways, it's going to come down to how comfortable you are with the edge guarding dynamic. If you're willing to take the risk to get edge guarded more, to potentially edge guard your opponent more, and not have to worry about closing the gap as much. As far as other stats go, the top last one on the stage is pretty tall, which is a little weird. With this, with there being a top platform, you can still get kills fairly early here, but in general, top last zone kills are, not as common on this stage as on most of the others. Now, of course, you do also have to worry about potentially recovering in this platform. It's totally possible to reach, but kind of like the Fire Capital one, you do have to have a good amount of, like, height before, recovering to actually make it there. So it's, how many characters can use it is a little niche in the long run. Now keep in mind, while it is kind of tricky to just straight up get kills off of edge guards on this stage, because it's easy to throw them off stage in the first place, you can use those edge guarding scenarios to really whittle them down. So that is definitely something to consider, right? Is that even though the stage in neutral tends to be a little scrappy, an advantage, it can definitely take a more slow and steady pace because of how much space you have off stage DI. Another weird thing about the stage is also the platforms being kind of long. Like I mentioned with Armada, some characters may be able to cover everything, but for the most part, you're not going to see that on the stage. So you do want to be careful about that when potentially trying to do like platform tech chases, is that you don't really have very many catch-all options on these platforms. You gotta just be very, very committal a lot of the time and just make your gas. Either that or be really on point with your reactions. Overall, the characters that really like this stage tend to include Shovel Knight, Fours, Raster are probably like the best examples. I really don't think there's a single character on this stage that's bad. It just kind of comes down to, again, that edge guarding dynamic, right? How comfortable are you with taking the risk of being whittled down off stage, for a good chunk of the game, versus how much do you want to just play super scrappy? Alright, this is finally my least favorite stage. I'm gonna be very blunt, I'm biased as hell against this stage. It does have its place in this game though, so I don't want to be like totally unfair to it. This is the Blazing Hideout. Congrats, you can play Blazing Hideout now. But in all seriousness, right? I mean, people like to call this Platdrop City, Platdrop Central, whatever you want to say. At the end of the day, playing to the platform is just how you do it here. I think it should be no surprise, what characters tend to gravitate to the siege. Rana and Fours are, Rana, Fours, Aether are some of the most prominent examples. There's definitely a lot of interesting stuff about this platform, right? So remember how I said last video with the gates, that was a unique platform height? It is not the only unique platform height. I cannot tip or up tilt on this stage. I can tip or up strong though. It's very silly. And yeah, there's a good amount of stuff that may hit even on gates, right? But it won't hit here. So have fun with that. You kind of have to figure out like a whole new way to shark. There's also a lot of characters where they can't full hop onto the platform. So you see with Claren, even if I like Nair, I can't. But with certain characters will be able to actually land on the platform with specific aerials. It's just move dependent. Now what you can typically do is either this, right? You full hop and then wave land, and it'll snap you up to the platform. Or you can do like instant double jump. For a character like Claren with like this long-lasting Nair, this instant double jump thing is definitely something she has on this stage. I feel like a lot of characters do have some kind of gimmick on this stage, but there's a lot of characters where that gimmick's just not especially great, right? Like with Claren, you know, you have the funny double jump Nair, and also just random Dacus tippers on the platform. You know, a character like, say, Absa, also generally considered to be somewhat weak here. She can do like a diagonal up B. I believe it's diagonal, but I guess you can also just do straight vertical, and you can like wave land on the platform, so that gives you some potential new avenues for up B movement. For the most part, that tends not to really outshine the types of characters that can just hang out on this platform, kind of play like hard to get, you know, avoid any of like the easier, safer sharking moves, and then just rain hell on you with their funny patch up aerial combo starters, kill confirm starters, etc, etc. The blast zones on this stage are also pretty large across the board, right? Bottom blast zone is a little close, but the other two kind of on the large side. I guess the top blast zone is actually like average, it's like right in the middle. There are definitely some situations where you're going to end up playing pretty grounded neutral if neither party wants to plat drop, but honestly, if neither party wants to plat drop, I feel like you're not going to be picking the stage anyway. With the platform being as long as it is, you know, obviously the longest platform in the game, you definitely also have some interesting scenarios with like combo extensions and tech chases on this platform, where you kind of do have to make it kind of like Treetop, you know, you have to make like even harder reads on these platforms. That's something I actually haven't really talked about. On a lot of like the smaller normal size platforms, a good amount of characters can actually just, if you tech at all, they can just go like wave land down strong and it's going to cover everything. So on those stages, you do have a lot of mix-ups with like not teching on platform and jumping away versus like teching and trying to avoid an immediate follow-up. And that kind of stuff does definitely happen on Hideout, but it's always a little bit weirder on the stage, because again, it's like kind of harder to get on the platform in the first place. And like takes longer to get on the platform. It's a much different timing. Like you can see the timing I was just doing instinctively was probably like the, you know, the normal hype timing. Because I barely play on the stage, I don't really even know this one. You still have options that can cover a good amount of the platform and potentially cover everything they can roll to, but you have to kind of catch like right where they, you know, tack at and be like really on point with that spacing. In general, like, and I talked a little bit about who likes the stage earlier, I feel like Zeta like Zeta, Rana, and Forez are going to be some of the big examples. Or Kane also is really good on the stage, and I think Atlas is pretty solid too. And yeah, aside from Claren and Absa, I can't think of anyone that generally dislikes the stage. But those two definitely are not huge fans for the most part. Alright everyone, you know what time it is if you know Rivals. It is Tempest Peak. And my first bullet point for this was, oh god, what were they thinking, lol. So, yeah, no, I love this stage actually. It's one of my favorite stages in the game, at least for Claren. Remember how I mentioned for Hideout, you know, like most characters, you kinda have a gimmick on that stage? Well, every character just straight up actually has a gimmick on this stage. It's definitely one of the hardest stages to get used to. Obviously an extremely unique layout going on over here. This is, like Treetop, the shortest stage in the game in terms of just like the raw stage length. But then you add in those overhanging plats, and it's like suddenly, oh, very big actually. Yeah, so not only, these aren't even really overhanging, they're just straight up off the stage. Like they're doing their own thing. And with the main stage being so small, but still having two platforms, kinda like Merchant, you can move between these, but because they're so short, it's not actually that effective, it's just something you can do. But what I'm really trying to sell with that is that all of these platforms are like this main stage tends to be really cramped, but then you kind of go off stage here, and it's like you have this extra area to work with and play really defensive. There's a lot of different playstyles that can be brought out on this stage if you're, you know, like evil enough to take advantage of it, because people really hate this stage. I know some people, mostly lower level players, I think eventually you learn better, but they'll leave the stage open because they just don't think anyone will be enough of a bitch to choose it. But really, in reality, they're the bitch for being afraid of the stage, because it is awesome. I don't even really know where to begin, honestly. But yeah, blast zone-wise, the stage actually has massive blast zones across the board, including the tallest top blast zone in the game. So vertigo kills can definitely happen, but they're going to be a little rarer than usual. Really, where you're looking for kills on this stage tends to actually be off of these, like, edge guard chains. Kind of like Rockwall, right? Remember how I mentioned, like, a lot of the time you can't really DI those kinds of things because there's so little distance? Well, on this stage it's a little different. Instead of there being very little distance, there's this platform, right? You literally get more stage to just keep doing it and then, like, extend off of here, and it just goes insane. Characters like Crag and Setterburn can just clean house on them if the stars align on some level. Especially Setterburn. Like, Setterburn can be insane on the stage a lot of the time. I feel like Sylve and Etalist do struggle with the stage a little bit, and the main stage being so short does kind of limit what they can do, but they still have options, right? I mean, Etalist has his own crazy good fair chains, as does Sylve, and Sylve can do, like, zoning from the side platform, you know, big moves, big seed, like, you can definitely do stuff with that. Etalist can quickly coat, like, the entire stage in ice, so he's got, like, good stage control on that front, too. So even the characters that are kind of mediocre here, like, they're still good. I mentioned, like, pressing big buttons from these side platforms that'll reach the main stage, but for a character with good path boosts like Claren, you know, you can, like, come onto the stage with an aerial, and then, edge cancel that path boost aerial, which for Claren ends up being, like, I think probably her biggest gimmick on the stage. So you have that edge guarding aspect, you have that sort of aspect of how you think in your neutral to either enable aggression or just play super defensive. But also, you can recover to it, you know, like, obviously. But if you haven't really thought about it before, like, this makes every recovery in the game so much better. And it adds a lot of kind of layers to, as, like, the person doing the edge guard, you know, can I cover both? I feel like most characters can't, but some can. What am I going to do to cover that? You know, like, this platform makes recovering so much safer. So if you're kind of getting edge guarded, yes, you get thrown off stage a lot, but unlike Treetop, you do have, like, a literal safety net right here when edge guarding. Obviously, if you get caught on this platform, you're kind of fucked. Like, kind of sort of a little in a really bad spot, but honestly, having it's way better than not having it despite that risk. Because covering it does tend to genuinely be really difficult for a lot of the cast, you know? Now, granted, in my opinion, the main reason to avoid this stage is to avoid people who are really good at playing defensive on these side plats. I know, like, Crag in particular can be kind of obnoxious about it because he can, like, you know, come up here, pillar, and then land on stage and then go back on the pillar, and then it's just the whole thing. You gotta, like, have fun with that, I guess. Other characters, I know, like, Raster can be really evil with the way he maneuvers around the stage. You can just, like, zip around it and it's really hard to catch him. Over on these side platforms. It's really hard to pinpoint specific characters on the stage, honestly, because, again, everyone's got their things that are broken. It isn't a matter of, like, are you comfortable enough on the stage to deal with your opponent's broken options? And I really like how it's just ramped up the absurdity of the game to 11. You definitely see a lot of, like, flat drop stuff on the main stage because of these platforms being, like, covering so much of the stage. Again, like, you know, you can be defensive on those side plats, but you can also be super aggressive in the main stage because you're just kind of always in your opponent's face, more or less, or at the very least always able to get in your opponent's face. Other than that, also worth mentioning, I feel like it's pretty hard to get spike kills on the stage. You can definitely do it from, like, this platform, but it can occasionally be tough. You know, for a character like Claren, granted, I'm privileged with disjointed spike move, but most characters don't have that. So getting spikes here is definitely a little awkward, comparatively speaking, but that's, like, a really small thing for a lot of characters. And again, like, if you manage to find a setup for a spike here, then there's only so many ways the opponent has to edge guard, or to DI, sorry. I think I covered with everything on the stage. I did have a lot to talk about, but yeah, this is just one of the weirdest stages in all of Flat Fighters, so it makes sense. Alright everyone, we got 4 more stages left. Hoping to breeze through the rest of these. Again, I'm very sorry if this is, like, way longer than you'd think it would be, but I can't help but try to be thorough. So, we got Frozen Fortress, and honestly, in a lot of ways, it's just kind of Diet Fire Capital. Part of why I said this would be quick, because I feel like a lot of these stages, you know, lots of comparisons to draw here. So yeah, you can see a lot of similarities right out the gate, of course, with those high platforms being on the side. It's possible to use them for recovery, but not super easy. You can see even, while jumping very close to the edge, you know, Claren cannot, make it up there. I have to do it. Yeah, even if I do it, like, almost as high as I can. Yeah. Right, I know I've done it before, but you have to burn a lot of resources to, make it up there, so... Definitely something to keep in mind. Now the stage does have a tri-plat layout, but it's kind of inverted for what you'd expect. So the middle platform is down here, low. And what's actually ends up meaning is that controlling this platform on this stage becomes a lot more important than it would be on a lot of other stages. Kind of the big key to mastering Frozen is like being good at controlling this, because yeah, you can definitely get a lot of mileage out of plat camping on these two top platforms, but kind of once you get control of the middle platform, you can make it a lot harder for whoever's up here to really go anywhere. You'll definitely see people trying to play to the middle a good amount of the time, that or just really lean into their defensive game and do their best to like keep themselves in positions like faster than anyone in center stage can really keep up with. Stage is of course pretty long. Blast zones are also very large across the board, not nearly as large as Fire Capital, but still pretty big. You definitely see the stage being picked by a lot of heavies, not so much Aether, but like the other ones do tend to have a bit of an affinity for the stage. I'd say particularly like Sylvan Crag really like the stage. Another aspect of controlling center plat too is that if you need to take a defensive position, it's a lot easier to do like this. Right, it's a lot easier to do that, essentially, than it is to, like, do it from the ground level. So it allows you to quickly take a better defensive position as well, if the opponent tries to get more aggressive. Like, there's a lot you can do when controlling the center plat. Combos as well, is that there's some potential for ladder combos. I think Danzello is the player I always point to for having, like, a really scary combo game on the stage. Because despite how big it is, excuse me, he's very good at still killing you like ridiculously early here and always making you afraid of just Aether's crazy combo game. In terms of what characters are good here besides the ones I mentioned, Crag and Soph, again, I think Zetter's pretty solid here. Maple, Raster, or Kane, all pretty solid characters here, all things considered. You know, you see a lot of like the generalist characters, I think, get some decent mileage here, and again, a good amount of the heavies. In terms of who's not so hot here, I think Aether has a pretty rough time on Frozen. Claren and Malo as well. Kind of not great on this stage. If you want, you know, another big stage where you can like play a more slower defensive game, but you don't want to go as extreme as Fire Capital, then that's essentially what you'll be using Frozen for, I'd say. That, or it's like they banned Fire Capital, but they couldn't justify banning Frozen, and now this is your only like open defensive stage. Alright, so next up on the list we got Abyss. So this is this game's FD, and I feel like if, you know, you're familiar with FD and Smash, I mean, you're gonna be able to figure out the deal with the stage, right? You'll play a good ground and neutral. That's it. I talked a little bit about ground and neutral, but this is really the stage where it all, like, is at its most extreme, because obviously there isn't a platform. You're always playing ground and neutral. So your options tend to be a little bit more limited here compared to other stages. This is also true with recovering, right? Literally no platforms to recover to. There's never a time where platforms are going to aid in your recovery. So, always gonna have to keep that in mind with this stage, is that, yeah, like, this advantage tends to be pretty rough. You know, there's no platform extensions, per se, but you also never have the chance of using a platform to escape a punish, which is definitely, like, a thing that I talked about a little bit a couple stages ago, is that, you know, you do have those, like, tech mix-ups on other stages, and now they're just gone. Like, you can never, you know, get away with DIing to a plat. This would make for some fairly simple games, I guess. Recovery can definitely be a little one-sided as well, because what do you really do, right? Like, you got nowhere to go but here, and if they're good at covering right here, then, oops. I feel like the good characters on this stage should be pretty self-explanatory, right? Aether and Soph are obviously the really infamous ones. Rano as well. As much as he likes platforms, Needles are really good at covering the ground. So, you know, he can kind of limit the opponent's approach options really well, just taking advantage of Needles. Crag. Did I already mention Crag? I probably already mentioned Crag. If not, yeah, Crag's really good here. It's definitely weird because he doesn't necessarily get, like, too many crazy strengths, but his rock game, you know, rock in general is just so difficult to deal with when you don't have plats to, like, mix up your movement and whatnot. That ends up being a pain in the ass to deal with, and his edge guard just becomes so much scarier. I think those are, like, the big four. There are definitely some other characters that can be scary here. Like, I think Ellie can be obnoxious. She's not, like, incredible on the stage, but she can definitely be obnoxious to deal with. Bad characters, generally, I think the worst are going to be Claren and Forsburn. You know, both of them... Mina, you know, especially Forsburn, he really likes his platforms in neutral, and they both lose a lot with recovery when they're on a platform to kind of save their ass in some scarier situations. Top blast on this stage is fairly small, but a lot of that is because there's no platforms to really fish for like super early kills, so unless you're a character like Eliana that's really good at carrying someone from the ground to the top, then the kills are early, but they're not as early as you might expect. Other than that, the other blast zones are pretty large, so it can take a long time to get kills here. This is probably what I'd imagine to be like the overall least favorite stage in Rivals. With good reason, I think. You know, the platforms in this game are really fun. The stage does have its place in the game, again, for those characters that love the ground and neutral and those players that are looking to abuse it, but you gotta make sure you're really comfortable and confident in your ability to take advantage of that, like, way better than your opponent can. Alright, so 2 stages left. Both of these are actually pretty small, and I wouldn't say necessarily similar, but they do tend to appeal to, like, similar characters and players, I'd say. So first up, we have Ori's Stage, a spirit tree. Definitely a bit of a funky one. So, what's interesting about these platforms right here is that they're shorter than normal. We haven't really seen this with any stages so far. They're actually short enough that, I guess not on Sylve, but on like an average height character, the last hit of Clarion Nair can actually hit below the platform unless you crouch. And you cannot crouch below Dare, which is actually something you can do on every other stage in the game. You can crouch below the platform and Dare won't hit you. So just goes to show, right? And there's also other stuff, like say Rana F Strong, that hits platform. I think Clarion can get like the front hit of tip for F Strong on the stage instead of like the top hit. It's very funky, there's a lot of weird stuff. But of course the main thing with that platform that's interesting isn't really the height, although there's definitely some situations where you can get silly with it. But it's that they're overhanging, right? So I think this is actually the first time we've seen, weirdly enough, they're just both at the end of like the way I'm presenting this, where the platform is like hanging off the edge of the stage, but it is still like on the stage. Actually, I guess there's Jules Veil, right? Jules Veil is like that some of the time, like about half. So yeah, because of that, right? These platforms are going to be super helpful for recovery. Maybe not quite as dramatically helpful as the Tempest ones, but still. And what's nice about them too is that because they are still on the stage, it is actually a little bit easier to go for the edge cancel off of them. Now granted, if you miss like an edge cancel on the Tempest plat, you can still go and wall jump. But here, you know, you land on stage. See, for a character like Clarion, that is super helpful. And even these back ones, right, being able to go higher but still find that edge cancel a little easier, something I'm a big fan of. Now again, as per usual, if you do get caught going for, you know, this kind of recovery, you are going to be in a worse spot. The blast zones on this stage are actually pretty small. Smallest top blast zone in the game, which is really what the stage is infamous for. But, you know, the side and bottom blast zones, they're average, all things considered. But when the stage has overhanging plats like this, those smaller side blast zones get a lot more exaggerated. You know, characters with good corner carry, like, say, Hodon or Crag, they are going to be able to kind of torture you, you know, if you get fared over here by one of those characters. Might have a way to get out, but at certain percents you're just going to be dead off of that fair, essentially. That also helps because once again, you know, with it being a smaller stage, this is so it's the second smallest stage length, so it's a little bit shorter than like Tempest or Treetop, but not by much. It is still very short overall. You do get thrown off stage pretty often, but again, it goes back to the overhanging platforms. Those are going to help you stay alive a bit longer and just have an easier time recovering, as long as you don't just get like blown up off the top or something. It is also kind of interesting that there's no platforms near the center, of course, so having like good aerial movement does end up being pretty important here. Again, plat boosting, my beloved, really. You know, can cover a pretty good amount of the stage with the plat boost, you know, from the edge of the platform that goes all the way almost to the end, essentially. So if your character has one, you know, Clarion, Ori, Zetaburn 4s are like probably the 4 best characters in regards to it, then go crazy. You know, there's definitely going to be something for you to like on the stage. Really, though, with all that said, at the end of the day, a lot of what people like this stage for is going to be just those crazy early vertical kills. You're able to really, especially like lower levels of play, it really helps to potentially patch up people not having the best kill power themselves. You see the stage a lot in like amateur brackets. Understandably so, honestly, because it is a very fun stage. It's a bit of a risky one at times, so you definitely want to, you know, not pick it and then be dying at 100 yourself every time. As far as who's good on this stage, you definitely see a lot of Clarion preference here. Fire characters in general all like the stage. You know, particularly I think Clarion and Zeta are really infamous here, but they're not the only ones. Hodon and Absa are also pretty good here. Both of them have such good vertical kill power that the stage really does like exemplify that and makes it so that you're just dying at the stupidest percents. So, yeah, at the end of the day, that ends up being like the big thing when it comes to the stage, I think. That and the overhanging platforms for recovery. And finally, to cap it all off, we have Troupple Pond. So yeah, the stage actually has quite a bit in common with Spirit Tree. It's kind of like if you mash Spirit Tree and Tower together almost. Now granted, the stage's blast zones are a bit larger than those twos, right? Side blast zones are kind of small, which can especially be exemplified by, you know, the funny overhangs. But other than that, you know, not crazy small. Overhangs, you know, to aid in recovery. Always a little risky to get caught on those, but for the most part, it's ideal for recovery. Very difficult to cover both an overhang and, like, the main stage. This is another one tied for the shortest stage in the game. So you do get thrown off stage pretty often, but ends up making the stage really scrappy. And unsurprisingly, you know, with the flat boost potential you get here, you guessed it, fire characters really like this stage. Should not be much of a surprise. I also feel like air characters tend to like this stage. As far as characters that dislike the stage, Sylvan and Edelus are definitely going to be like the main offenders. Those two definitely don't tend to have a fun time here. It's not like unplayably bad, but it's not great for either of them, and I definitely recommend steering clear if you play one of those characters. But yeah, I don't really think there's much else to add, honestly, because I mean, the stage really does speak for itself, right? You get like the platform movement and mix-ups and like ladder combos that you get on Tower. You get the overhanging plat recoveries that you get from Spirit Tree. Mash them together, expand the blast zones, boom, you got like a pretty nice stage. I have a lot of fun on it, so yeah. So yeah, definitely kind of blew through that last one, but honestly, Troupple is probably one of the most self-explanatory stages in the game, so I guess it's a fitting end, right? I'm sorry if you can tell, my brain is kind of melted right now, because this has gone on a lot. This always goes on a lot longer than I expected to, but if you've watched both parts, thank you so much. I really hope you were able to learn something if you're new to the game, trying to figure out the stage list in which you want to pick. Hopefully the stage will, or these videos will help you a bit. Again, shoutouts to Dynas and Igor for helping me gather up the information. You know, again, I did go off the cuff for everything, but they really helped me organize everything and figure out like what I was going to try to say, so this video really wouldn't be as good without their help. If you enjoy these videos, I would definitely recommend liking and subscribing, possibly also following me on Twitter at CyberHexManiac. Because I have lots of content in the works right now, and I'm really excited to share it with you all, so definitely be sure to stick around for that. If you have any suggestions or questions, you can leave those down in the comments. Definitely going to be paying attention to those. You can also contact me at Discord, on Discord at CyberHex1434. I can't really think of too much to add on to the end of this, so yeah, I hope you'll have a nice day. Bye-bye.